In this world, there are humanoid races, humans, elves, and dwarves blessed by the gods of light. Beyond them, there are also demons, fewer in number but blessed by darkness, and far stronger than the humanoids. For millennia, these two forces have clashed, dividing the vast continent of Lunders into east and west. But 300 years ago, when a more moderate demon king rose to the throne, things finally settled down. The humanoids were able to get used to a fleeting peace. That peace lasted until the 5th month of the year 2826, when everything changed. Under a new demon king, the demons launched a full-scale assault on the humanoids, a campaign that would later be remembered as the Great Invasion. Without caring for their losses, the demons fought with savage intensity, toppling enemy nations in the blink of an eye. By the 4th month of the following year, 2827, the Gargan Empire, then the mightiest of all humanoid powers, had fallen. With such a heavy blow, the humanoids grew desperate. They rallied their remaining forces and launched a reckless assault against the demon army. At the same time, a squad broke into the Demon King's castle, the heart of enemy territory, in a final, desperate gambit to take down their foe's leader. Back in that moment, the squad stormed the fortress, only to be met by demons intent on stopping them, to let his comrades press on with their mission. A warrior named Theron chose to hold back the enemy himself. As the others reached a massive gate, battered and worn, the man of the pair took a potion and his eyes flashed red, while the woman trembled with exhaustion and fear. Even so, they forced the doors open and, at the far end of the hall, spotted a magical artifact. But as they approached, a trap was sprung. Spells rained down on the knight who led the way. Just in time, the mage, seeing her ally about to be killed, managed to shield him with her magic. But the attack was so overwhelming, it nearly broke her. The warrior, in a panic, shouted Urza's name until she was utterly swallowed by the spell. A moment later, a winged demon appeared before the man, whose anger at watching his friends die consumed him. As the demon unleashed more and more magical blasts, the warrior charged forward, parrying what he could, until he got close enough to strike. The demon's armored shell cracked, but it quickly regenerated, pressing the attack with a short weapon to push the warrior back. Gaining some distance, the demon returned to casting spells, hurling them with such intensity that the warrior could barely defend himself. Desperate, he called out, "What kind of attack is this?" A woman's voice, cold and mechanical, answered like some sort of system. It was elimination, a high-level spell that couldn't be blocked and destroyed everything in its path. With nothing left to lose, the man realized his only hope was to unleash the magical power stored in his gemstone. As if reading his thoughts, the woman's voice replied that if her bearer was risking everything, she'd follow him to the end. She spoke. Laws of wisdom. Become a ray of light and dispel the ignorance of darkness. At once, a bluish aura enveloped the knight, letting him absorb the demon's spells unharmed. Not only that he managed to close the distance and drive his sword through the demon's torso, the unleashed power was so overwhelming, it shattered not only the magic gem in his sword, but the blade itself splintered like glass. The demon's mask began to crumble, and after a burst of light that left only a few feathers behind, its body vanished entirely. Bleeding and on his knees, the knight whispered, "It's finally over." But there was no one left to hear him. The woman's voice that had guided him through this brutal battle was gone forever. The warrior dropped his sword, looked up, and faced the quiet, the likely last survivor of a war that had taken everything from him. His homeland, his family, his friends, the ones he loved, he'd lost it all. Collapsing to the ground, he realized he might as well let go, too. But then, the magical artifact at the back of the hall began to shine. Fearing the thing would spiral out of control, the man crawled toward it, not even knowing what he'd do when he got there. Practically dragging himself, he finally reached out and seized the object. Instantly, a magic circle formed beneath him, and an impossibly bright light flooded the entire chamber. Next, we see shadowy butterflies drifting through a field of flowers, their dust swirling in an endless expanse of white, shifting back and forth with darkness as the butterflies moved. At some point, the warrior awoke in bed. As he regained his senses, he realized he was in his own room, something that should have been impossible. Peering out the window, he saw the beautiful city he'd lived in all his life, untouched. Nothing like the chaos and devastation that had wiped out his people. Tears welled up in his eyes. Surely this had to be a dream. Just then, a girl burst into his room and said, "Kyle, how long are you gonna sleep? Come on, wake up already." The moment he saw Lise, emotion overtook him. He hugged his friend tight and long, not caring if this was just a dream. Just seeing her, just being with her, was enough. Embarrassed beyond belief, Lise tried to escape the hug. but the two of them tangled up and toppled onto the bed in a compromising position. Flustered, she shoved the idiot and socked him right in the gut, making him double over from the blow. Still fuming, she couldn't understand what he was thinking, but made it clear she wasn't ready for any of that. Muttering her annoyance, she stormed out, leaving Kyle gasping from the punch and starting to wonder if maybe this wasn't a dream after all. Pulling back the covers, he spotted the magical artifact from that dark hall, sitting there in plain sight, and realized this was all real. As he looks in the mirror, the young man touches his face and realizes he looks younger. On top of that, he could have sworn he'd suffered fatal injuries, but now he's perfectly fine. If this isn't a dream, then something bizarre is definitely going on. Filled with questions, Kyle heads out to his balcony and once again scans the city, which looks as ordinary as ever. At the same time, he's young again, and Lise is alive and well. So, the only thing Kyle can guess is that he's somehow gone back in time. With the magic stone in his hand, he wonders if this artifact is the reason for all of this, since he's never heard of any spell that could turn back the clock. Either way, the hunger he suddenly feels is all too real. So he heads downstairs and finds a feast that Lise must have made for him. She often cooked at home, since neither Kyle nor his mother knew how to make anything edible. Overjoyed, Kyle sits down and actually sheds a tear as he tastes the stew, a real meal he hadn't had in ages. After stuffing himself with literally everything on the table, Kyle sees a much younger Theron walk in. Immediately annoyed to find that Kyle devoured the entire spread and left nothing for him. In disbelief, Kyle remembers perfectly well that just minutes ago, he and this guy had been fighting side by side in a war. Theron asks why he's staring at him like that. So, playing it cool, Kyle casually asks what day, month, and year it is. Still a bit confused, Theron says it's the 24th day of the 5th month, 2823. Actually, once he remembers what day it is, Theron congratulates Kyle on his birthday and forgives him for eating all the food after all. That was his birthday present. Still, that doesn't solve Theron's hunger problem. So now he has to throw himself at Lisa's mercy and beg her for another meal. Now alone, Kyle wonders what he's supposed to do, since he really has traveled back to the past. Soon enough, he decides to look for answers from someone who's usually found in an old library. As he goes downstairs and finds this person buried in books in the dim light, Kyle instantly recalls the moment he saw this woman, his mother, dead in the war. She comments that it's rare for her son to show up there, while Kyle admits he'd love to ask her a question about magic. She's not sure she'll be much help, though Kyle remembers that she's one of the few archmages in the country and that hardly anyone around knows more about sorcery than she does. Gaining confidence, Kyle asks if there's any spell for going back to the past, and she replies that, yes, such spells exist, though they're not widely known. The thing is, people only know they exist, they can't actually use them, because of the sheer amount of magical power required. Even if the greatest mage in history spent all his power, she figures he'd only be able to turn back time by a single second. Kyle asks what would happen if a magic item were involved, and his mother says it's an interesting idea using something like that to store magical energy, but it would take more than 1,000 years to build up that much power. Then, Kyle brings up the idea of using the Forbidden Rite, a ritual that turns life force into magical energy. His mother is startled that he even knows such a thing exists, so he awkwardly explains that he read about it in a book. She quickly says it would still be impossible. You'd need to drain the life of half the continent's humanoids, and besides, there's no catalyst capable of storing that much magic. Or wait, thinking it over, she grabs a book from the shelf and remembers there actually is one option. The legendary Heart of the Divine Dragon is the only way to perform such a rite. Seeing the illustration of the dragon in the book, Kyle reflects that the ancient magical kingdom of Zarls thrived for 1,000 years thanks to the Heart of the Divine Dragon and the incredible power it held. But all that energy eventually ran out, leading to the kingdom's fall. Kyle's mother explains that the heart could store enough power to turn back time, but it's been missing for over 1,000 years and may well have ended up in the hands of demons. Closing the book, she brightens up, saying it's been so long since she's talked this much with her son, ever since he abandoned his sword training and started avoiding her. On that note, Kyle apologizes, saying he didn't do it on purpose. She admits she misses him a lot, and points out that today, he seems more mature than usual, almost as if he came from the future. Moving on, she says she's starving and would love some of the food Lise made. At that, Kyle confesses he ate it all, leaving his mother speechless, until she remembers it's his birthday today. So she cuts him some slack for his monstrous appetite. In fact, she tells him to consider the meal his birthday present. And Kyle wonders why everyone's so eager to save money on his gift. Later that afternoon, with the magic stone in hand, Kyle finds a quiet spot to look out over the city. Until Lise shows up after searching everywhere for him. Instantly, he begs her forgiveness for eating all the food she made, and at least Lise recognizes he feels bad about it. Kyle tries to explain, saying he had a dream that really shook him up. So Lise asks if it was a dream where she died. Sadly, Kyle says yes, and that helps her understand why he was acting so strange that morning. In any case, she forgives him, especially since it's his birthday. Happy birthday, Kyle, Lise says. With images of his city in flames, Kyle reflects on how his hometown was close to demon territory and was attacked during the Great Invasion. The demons burned everything to the ground, turning the city into a real hell, and that's how Kyle lost Lise. On that day, the warriors swore revenge. In the midst of these thoughts, the boy is suddenly interrupted by his friend, who's already starting to get nervous about the look on his face. He brushes it off, telling her it's nothing, and Lise accepts his answer without pressing further. But Kyle can't shake what's on his mind. In 3 years, the peace they know now will come to an end, and he's the only one who knows it. If he does nothing, he'll be forced to relive that brutal moment of annihilation, losing his family, his home, his world, and everyone he loves forever. With that weighing on him, the young man stands up and declares that he's going to change his own fate and the fate of the entire world. Later that night, he returns home and writes down every future event he can remember in a notebook. But that doesn't mean he has any idea what to do with that knowledge. Kyle has come from 4 years in the future, and the demons will attack in 3. But even if he tries to warn people about what's coming, nobody will believe him. Faced with this reality, he decides that he'll have to kill the mysterious next demon king himself. But deep down, he knows there's no way he can pull it off alone. So, Kyle gets up, grabs his sword, and heads out into the night. By sunrise, he was still going, practicing combat moves, when out of nowhere the very same demon he'd faced in his final moments appeared. Even though he was younger now, Kyle didn't flinch. He gripped the sword tightly, drew a deep breath, and blocked every spell the demon threw his way except the last one, which landed right in his side. Wounded, the boy reminded himself that the Great Invasion was still 3 years away, and he'd barely ever trained with a sword, let alone magic. If he really wanted to change the course of destiny, he'd need more strength, more speed. Still, from what he'd just tested, his spells seemed a lot more powerful than before. So why had his magical power increased? Feeling a little more confident, he charged at the demon, but was knocked down almost instantly. From the ground, Kyle realized something important. Sure, he was stronger now, but his body couldn't keep up with all that power. In other words, he'd have to toughen up enough to handle this evolution, so that, one day, he could grow old in peace and live a quiet life. Watching their friend flat on the ground, Theron and Lise wondered what had gotten into him. He'd been acting strange since yesterday. Just 3 days ago, Kyle had given up after 50 straight rounds of staring contests, most of which Theron had won at least, according to him. Right then, a humanoid named Layla showed up, Theron's mom, back from her trip. She immediately asked if her hopeless son had managed to survive on his own these past few days. Lise wasted no time ratting him out. He'd been begging her for food every single day. Laughing, Layla asked what invisible creature Kyle was fighting, because honestly, this looked more like a crazy hallucination than any kind of training. Lise mentioned that, until the other day, he had the dead-eyed look of a fish, but now he'd suddenly become the savior of the world. Theron agreed it was odd. After all, Kyle's dream had always just been to live off his inheritance and take it easy. At that, Layla said there was only one thing that could make a kid change overnight: a woman. Hearing that, Lise tried to hide her sudden panic, and seeing the most likely candidate react that way, Layla started to wonder if maybe she was wrong after all. Still lying on the ground, Kyle mumbled to himself that he felt a weird burning sensation on his back. Maybe it was his magical power increasing. At that moment, Lise marched over, pure rage written all over her face. She demanded, "Out with it. Who's the hussy?" Kyle swore he had no idea what she was talking about, but she didn't buy it. She shook him so violently, you'd think she could force the answer out of him. In reality, all she managed to get was his entire lunch from the day before. Feeling bad about losing her temper, Lise whipped up a big meal for everyone. Kyle was genuinely happy to see his master back, and since she was there, he asked the group who they thought could possibly have enough influence to capture the attention of several nations. His mom said kings and the high priests of Mother Earth Kairos were plenty influential. while Layla claimed the one person who truly fit that bill was the great hero Randolph, the one who'd defeated the Demon King 300 years ago. Even Theron agreed that elves and dwarves alike would listen to Randolph. Taking it all in, Kyle figured that, out of all those options, the only thing he could become in 2 years was a great hero. Layla tried to make sense of why the boy was talking like this. But his mom was loving it. Her son was finally thinking about the future. Either way, they decided to keep an eye on him a while longer. Speaking of Kyle, he still couldn't shake the burning feeling in his back. That night, Kyle buried his nose in a stack of books. Knowing what was coming had to be an advantage. Theron walked into the room and was stunned. He never imagined he'd see his friend reading so much at once. He asked if Kyle was serious about becoming a hero, and Kyle nodded without hesitation. In fact, he wanted to know how to actually achieve that. So Theron joked that if he just took down the Demon King, he'd be halfway there. But getting serious, Kyle asked what it really took to be a hero. Theron said you needed strength, but Kyle knew strength alone wouldn't cut it. First and foremost, he thought, heroes needed money, especially since they couldn't accept rewards for saving people, and traveling, eating, and lodging all cost cash. On top of that, heroes needed connections, being treated special by the rich and famous, which would help boost their reputation naturally. Bottom line, money and contacts were a great start, but they weren't everything. There was also luck, but not just any luck, the kind that lets you save others from suffering. The sort of thing that makes you truly worthy of being called a knight. To be clear, Kyle wasn't saying he wanted to create problems just to solve them later. What he meant was, he'd use every tool at his disposal, even if it meant being a little hypocritical. Honestly, Theron didn't think that sounded like something a would-be hero would say. So he asked why Kyle wanted to become one. Looking at his friend, he got the feeling this wasn't really Kyle's true goal, maybe just a means to an end. But Kyle didn't reveal his real motives. He simply asked Theron to trust him. Theron, not pushing for an answer, wished him luck and headed out. Left alone, Kyle started thinking about how to get some money and how to find a certain person again. As for fame, it would be nice if he could do something about the Archen incident. In any case, time was tight, and he needed to act fast. The next morning, he told his master he was leaving on a journey. She asked if he'd told Saraya, his mother, and he said yes, though it had made her cry a little. Layla also asked him to bring Theron along. She figured it would be good for her son to learn a thing or two about the world, and, besides, he'd make a decent shield in a fight. Honestly, Kyle hadn't planned on using his friend like that. He was more thinking of him as a sacrificial pawn. Hearing that, Theron stepped in, wanting to know what was going on in the heads of these two lunatics. Later, deep in the forest, Kyle tells Lise about his trip that's coming up in just 2 days. His first stop will be Malad, the royal capital, where he plans to get what he needs to truly start his journey. But before anything else, Kyle makes it clear that he won't be taking Lise along. That instantly infuriates her, especially since he's planning to bring Theron, even though she's the one who trains with the Oracle warriors. Kyle counters that her mother wouldn't want to see her daughter in danger. But Lise snaps back that she'll apologize at her mother's grave as many times as it takes. Still, Kyle stands his ground. He wants to keep his friend safe. And before she can protest any further, he silences her with a kiss. Afterwards, he promises that Lise will be the very first person he sees when he returns, so she should have faith and wait for him. Lise protests it's not fair, because she always gets tongue-tied when he pulls this kind of stunt. Kyle just shrugs, saying it's just the poise that comes with age. Lise doesn't buy it after all. They're both only 16. But in the end, Kyle swears he'll come back safe, and that's what matters. After their talk, Kyle invites Lise to join him at the market. On the way, they come across an elf, something you hardly ever see around here. Clearly rattled for some reason, Kyle approaches the woman and suddenly remembers a moment the two once shared. Back then, the elf asked him to call her by her real name, but only when they were alone. So now, Kyle calls out to her, "Excess." At the sound of it, the woman instantly goes on guard and demands to know who this guy is. That's when Kyle remembers they haven't actually met yet in this timeline. Realizing things are getting worse by the second, he tries a different approach. Sleep, excess. The moment he says it, the elf collapses against his chest. Kyle recalls her mentioning that she'd been to Rimarze before, but he never expected to run into her here and now. And speaking of surprises, Kyle suddenly finds himself face to face with someone else who's anything but happy about what she just witnessed. Surrounded by the flames of jealousy, Lise can't deny the woman's beauty. But flirting that fast? That's just over the top. Not about to be left behind, Lise basically forces Kyle to let her tag along on this trip. There's no way she's letting him leave on his own. So now, the three of them come together for a not-so-pleasant conversation. Pretending not to know the elf, Kyle asks if her name is Urza. She slaps the table, demanding to know how he could possibly know her real name. Only her parents know that. Of course, Kyle can't exactly tell her that the two of them are destined to fall in love in 4 years, but with Urza threatening his life, he promises he'll explain everything in due time. To earn her trust, he suggests they forge a binding pact, making it impossible for him to use her real name for anything bad. Urza's caught off guard by the fact that this human even knows what that is, and when she sees Lisa's confused expression, Kyle explains, "Binding pacts are formed with nature spirits, but in the name of deities. Elementalists can give their true names to bind humans. The deal is, Kyle won't reveal Urza's true name to anyone, nor use it for anything illegal, and he knows breaking the pact means certain death." With those terms, Urza agrees, but tells them she can't actually make the pact until the full moon, which is still more than half a month away. That means she'll have to stay in town until then. Unfortunately, Kyle tells her he's leaving tomorrow, so Urza has no choice but to go with him. 2 days later, with the elf now part of the group, Kyle, Theron, and Lise say their goodbyes. Soraya breaks down in tears as her son departs. His father wishes him luck and tells him to look after his friends. Kyle thanks him and sets off with his new companions. On the road, Theron can't hide how thrilled he is to have someone as stunning as Urza along for the journey. But the elf makes it clear she's only here to keep an eye on the kid up front. Lise thought the royal capital was in the other direction, but Kyle explains that Malad can wait now that they've got an elemental elf with them. Urza insists she's not part of any group, while Lise and Theron welcome their new teammate with applause. Kyle then announces that their first stop is the Sungard Mountains. He asks if anyone knows the legend of Sungard, and Lise guesses it's about the ancient magical kingdom of Zarls, home to the labyrinth of the Mage King. Right on cue, Kyle produces a map of the place, complete with a marked treasure room. Theron and Lise immediately feel bad for him. He's clearly fallen for some scammer's trick. Kyle swears the map is genuine, but no one's buying it. Suddenly, Urza takes a closer look and realizes it's made from a magical tree that's over 1,000 years old, a lost art, impossible to reproduce today. That means the map might actually be the real deal. Taking things more seriously, Lise points out just how massive the place is and asks how long it'll take to reach the treasure. Kyle tells her he has a plan and basically, it's all about digging. Which brings us to the next scene, the group hard at work. Theron wonders why they're tunneling, and Kyle explains this is their shortcut to the treasure, since the labyrinth is packed with traps, impossible riddles, and self-operating magic weapons that could easily separate your head from your shoulders. Not exactly his idea of a good time. Honestly, when Kyle vowed to become a hero, he never imagined his first quest would involve a shovel. Urza feels the same way. She even asks about the presence of the gnome spirit, and Kyle explains it saves them the trouble and cost of buying magical equipment. That being said, Theron was just about to start digging at a specific spot when the elf stopped him. She pointed out he still hadn't reinforced the walls. Besides that, she told Kyle to use detect magic to confirm the direction of the treasure room. The kid replied he was already on it and got back to working with his partner. The two of them grumbled about how she was just a little too eager to act like the boss. After a long, hard day, the group sat down to enjoy a well-deserved meal, prepared by Lise, who, by the way, had hunted down a bear with her bare hands to serve for dinner. Later that night, after dinner, Urza asked Undyne to use her magic to provide underground water, giving them a hot spring so she and Lise could take a bath together. Theron tried to sneak a peek, but Kyle did everything he could to keep that from happening. Before getting back to work, Urza asked Kyle why he wanted to become a hero, guessing that the rings he wore were part of his training. He explained that each of those rings increased his body weight by 2 or 3 times. The elf wanted to know if this whole hero thing had anything to do with the fact that he knew her true name. But before Kyle could answer, he managed to reach the treasure room and told Urza to call the others. And so, the group finally achieved their goal. They found themselves face to face with a mind-blowing amount of treasure. Just like Scrooge McDuck, Theron rushed to dive into the gold, while Kyle warned everyone to be careful not to become slaves to money, pointing to his friend as an example of someone who'd already sold his soul for profit. At least the women agreed that Theron's behavior was shameful. So Kyle thanked his friend for preserving the girl's innocence by acting so ridiculously. Right after saying that, Kyle saw his chance. He dashed toward an entrance on the side of the room, where a sword was resting. As he got close, his magic stone activated, revealing a mysterious figure, someone genuinely impressed that anyone had actually made it this far. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.